Lena had always been the kind of girl people walked past without noticing. She wasn't invisible, but she carried herself with such quietness that most people simply never looked twice. She worked part-time at the community music hall, doing small tasks like arranging chairs, dusting shelves, checking lights, and sometimes helping the stage manager with simple errands. She never complained about anything and never tried to stand out. She liked it that way. Blending into the background made her feel safe. The music hall wasn't big or fancy. It was the kind of place where school events, charity programs, and small concerts were held. Every week something different happened there, and Lena enjoyed being around it. She loved how the halls echoed with random piano notes, the sound of people warming up, or the soft humming of singers practicing backstage. She never joined any of them, but she liked listening. Most people didn't know that she had grown up with music. Her mother had been a piano teacher, someone who believed music could heal anyone. Their small house always had music playing, sometimes classical, sometimes soft melodies her mother composed herself. But after her mother passed away, the piano at home became silent. Lena never touched it again. Even thinking about playing made her chest tighten, as if the memories were too heavy to handle. But at the music hall, there was always a piano nearby. Every time she walked past it while cleaning, she felt a tug inside her. Sometimes her fingers twitched like they wanted to press the keys, even just once. But she always stopped herself. She wasn't ready to reopen that part of her life. One morning, the staff was preparing for a small charity rehearsal. It wasn't a big event, just a simple performance where local performers were going to practice before the evening show. Lena was carrying a box of cables when the assistant organizer called out to her. "Hey, can you test the piano for a minute?" He asked casually. "Just play something simple so we can check the sound." Lena froze. She didn't expect that. She wasn't a performer. She wasn't even supposed to be near the stage in that way. She looked around to see if he was talking to someone else, but he was smiling at her, waiting for an answer. "Me?" she asked softly. "Yeah, just a small tune. Nothing fancy. We just need to make sure the keys aren't sticking." She swallowed hard. Her heartbeat felt louder than anything else in the hall. She didn't want to say no, but she also didn't know how to say yes. The piano on stage suddenly felt bigger, heavier, and scarier than ever. "If you don't want to, it's okay," the organizer added. "I just thought since you're here, it'd be quick." Lena didn't like disappointing people. She never wanted to seem difficult or unhelpful. So she took a slow breath and nodded. "Okay, I'll try." Her voice was barely louder than a whisper. She walked toward the stage, her steps slow and unsure. The hall was mostly empty, except for a few staff members talking among themselves. They weren't paying attention to her at all. To them, she was just the girl who arranged things. Nothing more. She reached the piano and touched the smooth wooden surface. It felt cold under her fingers. The last time she had touched a piano like this was years ago, when her mother sat beside her, gently correcting her posture or encouraging her to try again if she made a mistake. Lena sat down on the bench. It creaked slightly, making her jump. She took a breath and placed her hands on her lap for a moment. Her fingers felt stiff. The keys were right in front of her, bright and waiting. Just a simple tune, she whispered to herself. But even a simple tune felt heavy. She lifted her hands slowly and placed them on the keys. The moment her fingertips touched the surface, a rush of emotions washed through her: fear, sadness, longing, and something else she couldn't name. She pressed one key, softly. A single note rang out across the hall. It was clear and warm, echoing off the empty seats. She paused, waiting to see if anyone reacted. No one did. The staff continued their conversations. She pressed another key, then another. A small, gentle tune began to form, something her mother used to hum when watering plants. Lena didn't even think about it. Her fingers moved on instinct. The sound was soft, nothing dramatic or loud. But the notes carried a certain warmth, a certain tenderness that made the room feel different. It was as if her emotions were coming out through her fingertips. The staff members didn't look at her yet, but some of them unconsciously stopped talking. They didn't know why, but something in the atmosphere felt calmer, softer. Lena kept playing. The simple tune slowly grew into a small melody without her realizing it. Her fingers remembered the pattern perfectly, even though she hadn't practiced in years. It almost felt like her mother was still guiding her. Her heart beat faster as the music flowed. But this time, it wasn't anxiety. It was something close to relief. She didn't feel like she was performing. She didn't feel watched. She felt alone with the music, and for the first time in a long time, that thought didn't scare her. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the melody guide her instead of the other way around. Each note unlocked a memory of her mother smiling at her, teaching her how to play a scale correctly, clapping whenever she finished a piece, telling her that music was a language of its own. The notes grew clearer, more confident. Her fingers moved more freely. She forgot where she was. She forgot she was only supposed to play a simple tune. She forgot about the staff nearby. All she could hear was the piano. The sound filled the hall in a way she didn't expect. Even though it was just a small melody, it carried a depth of feeling. It wasn't loud or dramatic, but it was honest. One of the workers looked up, puzzled. He nudged another staff member and pointed toward the stage. Slowly, others turned their heads, their conversations fading into silence. They stared at Lena, surprised. None of them had ever seen her like this. They had only known her as the quiet girl who moved around carrying props and cleaning stands. They had never imagined she had the kind of touch that could make a piano speak. Lena still didn't notice them. She was somewhere else, somewhere between the memories she missed and the music she thought she had lost forever. Her back straightened slightly. Her breathing steadied, and even though her face still looked calm, there was a glow in her expression that no one had seen before. It was the look of someone reconnecting with a part of themselves they thought was gone. When she finally pressed the last note, it lingered in the air for a moment. She kept her hands on the keys, afraid to look up. She felt vulnerable, like she had just shown a piece of her heart. She slowly lifted her head. The staff members weren't talking anymore. They weren't moving either. They were just staring at her, some with raised eyebrows, some with soft, amazed expressions. Lena blinked in surprise. She hadn't expected anyone to listen. She hadn't expected anyone to care. The organizer who had asked her to play took a step forward. "That wasn't simple," he said quietly, almost as if he didn't want to break the moment. "That was beautiful." Lena felt her cheeks warm. She quickly shook her head. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. Don't apologize," he said gently. "I didn't know you could play like that." She looked down at the keys again, unsure of what to say. She wasn't used to being noticed, and she definitely wasn't used to being praised. The organizer smiled. "You surprised all of us." Lena's heart raced again, but this time it wasn't fear. It was something new, something she hadn't felt in years. She quietly stood up from the bench, unsure what this meant or how she should feel. All she knew was that she had touched the piano again, and something inside her had changed. She didn't know it yet, but this small moment would soon lead her somewhere. She never imagined she would go. Lena spent the rest of the day feeling different, almost as if something inside her had been shaken awake. She went back to her usual tasks, carrying boxes, wiping down chairs, checking lights, but her mind kept returning to the moment she touched the piano. It was strange. She had pushed music out of her life for so long, yet the feeling of those keys under her fingers felt familiar in a way she couldn't fully explain. It felt like coming home after being away for years, but the moment had also scared her. She had not planned to play. She only wanted to help for a few seconds, but instead she had lost herself in the melody. It felt good and painful at the same time, like opening a door she had tried very hard to keep closed. As she worked backstage, she kept her head down, avoiding eye contact with the staff. She wasn't used to attention, and now she felt everyone had seen a side of her she never wanted to show. Every time she walked past someone, she wondered if they were thinking about what they had heard. A few of them smiled softly when she passed, but she quickly looked away. She didn't know how to respond. Praise made her feel exposed. Compliments made her nervous. So she kept moving, hoping the day would end quietly. But things didn't go back to normal. Later in the afternoon, the main event organizer approached her near the back hallway. He wasn't the type of person who noticed quiet workers like Lena on a normal day, but now his expression was thoughtful, almost curious. "Do you have a minute?" he asked. Lena immediately panicked. Had she done something wrong? Had her playing interrupted their work? She nodded, cautiously. He walked a little closer and lowered his voice. "I heard you playing earlier. It was beautiful." Her cheeks warmed instantly. She looked at the ground. It was just a small tune. "It didn't sound small," he said gently. "You play with feeling. That's rare." She didn't know what to say, so she stayed quiet, hoping he would change the subject, but he didn't. "Have you played for long?" he asked. Lena felt her chest tighten. She didn't want to talk about her past. She didn't want to open that part of her life, not even a little. Memories of her mother, her old home, the sound of their small piano, they were still too heavy. "Not really," she said softly. "You play like someone who's been doing it for years," he said kindly. She hesitated, then finally whispered, "My mother taught me when I was little." He nodded with understanding. She must have been a good teacher. Lena gave a weak smile, then quickly excused herself, saying she had more things to finish. She walked away as fast as she could, without making it obvious. Talking about her mother felt like pressing on an old bruise. It didn't hurt as sharply as it once did, but it still wasn't healed. For the rest of the afternoon, she tried to avoid the stage. She didn't want to be near the piano again. It stirred up too many emotions. But every time she walked past the curtains, she felt a quiet urge to sit down again, even for a minute. The feeling confused her. When the evening rehearsal began, the performers started arriving. Singers warmed up backstage, musicians tuned their instruments, and dancers stretched near the mirrors. Everything felt lively and noisy, which usually made Lena feel more comfortable because she could hide in the background. But tonight, she felt different. She felt watched. Some of the performers had heard from the staff that one of the backstage helpers played the piano beautifully. They didn't know her name, so they simply glanced around curiously whenever they passed her. Lena avoided their eyes. She wished she could go back to being unnoticed. As she carried a stack of sheet music across the hallway, she overheard two performers whispering, "Is she the one who played earlier?" "I think so." They said it sounded professional. Lena felt her heartbeat quicken. She hurried past them and ducked behind a stack of chairs. Her hands were trembling. This was why she avoided playing in public. She didn't want people watching her, judging her, expecting something from her. She took a slow breath and tried to calm herself. The night rehearsal eventually ended, and the hall slowly emptied. Lena stayed behind with a few workers to help clean up. The stage lights were dimmed, and the piano stood quietly under the soft glow of the overhead lamps. It looked peaceful, almost inviting. But Lena didn't go near it. When she finally left the hall, the night air felt cool against her face. She walked home slowly, her hands deep in her pockets. The streets were quiet. The sound of her footsteps echoed softly. She thought about the moment she played earlier and how good it felt. Even though she didn't want to admit it, it had been years since. She allowed herself to feel something so deeply. When she reached her small apartment, she took off her shoes and sat on the edge of her bed. The room was simple plain walls, light curtains, a bookshelf with old music books she never opened, and a small plant her friend had given her. It wasn't a big space, but it was enough for her. She closed her eyes and tried to sleep, but the melody she played earlier kept repeating in her mind. Each note replayed softly, as if the piano keys were calling her back. She sighed and sat up again. Her gaze fell on a small wooden box under her bedside table. She hadn't opened it in a long time. Slowly, she reached for it and placed it on her lap. Her fingers hesitated before lifting the lid. Inside the box were a few old things, music, sheets written in her mother's handwriting, a small silver pendant her mother used to wear, and a folded photo of the two of them sitting by their old piano. Lena felt her throat tighten as she touched the photo. Her mother had loved music with her whole heart. She used to tell Lena, music is not just sound. It's a feeling. When you play with feeling, people hear your heart, not just your hands. Lena had lived with those words for years, but she had buried them deep after her mother passed. She couldn't bear to play anymore because it always reminded her of what she had lost. But today, for the first time, playing didn't break her. It felt like healing. She didn't know whether she was ready to open her heart to music again, but she knew one thing: her mother would have been proud. The next morning, Lena reached the music hall early. The sun had barely risen. The building was quiet, the doors still locked for the day. She stood outside for a moment, holding her bag tightly. She wasn't there early by accident. Something inside her wanted to see the piano again. She knew the janitor arrived early too, so she waited a few minutes until he unlocked the main entrance. She greeted him politely, then slipped inside, her footsteps light against the polished floor. The main hall was empty. The chairs were neatly arranged from the night before. The stage lamps were still dim, casting a soft glow over the piano. Lena walked slowly down the aisle, her heart beating a little faster with every step. She reached the stage and touched the wooden frame of the piano, her fingers running gently across its surface. She sat down again, just like she had yesterday. Only this time, she didn't feel scared. She felt calm. She placed her hands on the keys and took a deep breath. Then she played. The melody was soft at first, then grew clearer, fuller. She didn't play anything complicated. She just played what she felt. And for a moment, she forgot the world outside. She forgot the people who had watched her yesterday. She forgot her fear. She was just a girl playing the piano, the way she used to when her mother was alive. She didn't know that someone else had walked into the hall and was listening quietly from the yus back. She didn't know that her life was about to change. Again, she just kept playing, letting the music fill the empty hall with warmth that hadn't been there in years. And without realizing it, she was stepping back into a world she had once loved but thought she had lost forever. The hall was still half dark when Lena finished her quiet morning playing. The last note faded softly into the air, leaving behind a silence that felt warm instead of empty. She slowly lifted her hands from the keys and rested them in her lap, breathing out a long, gentle sigh. She hadn't expected to feel this calm so early in the day. Playing had become something she never allowed herself to do, yet now it felt like a small piece of her heart had finally been unlocked. She thought she was alone, but she wasn't. Someone at the back of the hall had stopped walking the moment the sound hit their ears. It was the senior coordinator of the event, a calm and thoughtful man who rarely arrived this early. He had entered the hall quietly, intending to check the stage settings for the upcoming program. But the moment he heard the soft piano melody drifting across the space, he froze. He stood there, halfway down the aisle, watching Lena on stage. At first, he didn't even know who she was. She looked different from a distance, more confident, more present, nothing like the shy girl who usually stayed near storage rooms or backstage corners. He didn't want to disturb her, so he simply listened. There was something special about the way she played. The notes were not loud or showy, yet each one felt sincere, like she was speaking through the piano. It was the kind of music that made people pause without knowing why. When she finally ended the melody, he stepped forward. Lena heard soft footsteps and turned quickly, startled. She stood up from the bench instinctively. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, as if she had been caught doing something wrong. "No need to apologize," the coordinator said with a gentle smile. "I didn't mean to surprise you." She looked down nervously. "I was just testing the keys." He raised a brow, amused. "That didn't sound like testing. That sounded like someone who truly knows how to play." Lena didn't answer, and he didn't push further. Instead, he walked to the front row and looked at the stage thoughtfully. "You know," he said, "most people who come early to the hall barely have enough energy to open their eyes. But you came early just to play." He paused. "There's meaning in that." Lena felt her stomach twist. She didn't like attention. She wished she could turn invisible again. "I didn't come to perform," she whispered. "I just wanted to feel the piano again." He nodded with understanding. Sometimes the things we do quietly are the things we're meant to do loudly. She didn't really understand what he meant, but she nodded politely anyway. "I won't bother you," he said. "But if you ever want to talk about performing, even for a small part of the event, let me know." Her eyes widened. No, I can't. I'm not." He held up his hand gently. "It's just an offer, not pressure." Then he walked away, leaving her standing beside the piano with her thoughts spinning in circles. Lena sat back down slowly. She stared at the keys, but suddenly she didn't feel like playing anymore. Her chest felt heavy again. Performing? That word scared her. She wasn't made for crowds. She wasn't trained for big audiences. She was just a helper, someone who belonged behind the curtains. She took her bag and left the hall before anyone else arrived. The rest of the morning moved quickly. The performers started showing up again, chatting loudly, tuning instruments, laughing among themselves. Lena tried to blend back into her small tasks as if nothing had changed, but she could feel the shift. Some of the workers who saw her yesterday now looked at her with a different kind of respect. One woman, who usually passed her without saying anything, smiled at her warmly. "You play beautifully," she whispered as she walked by. Lena's face turned pink. She nodded awkwardly and rushed away before the woman could say more. Even though everyone meant well, the new attention made her chest feel tight. She had spent most of her life trying not to be noticed. Now, suddenly, people were looking, whispering. Wondering dot at noon, while helping the lighting team adjust the stage bulbs, she overheard two of them talking. Is she the one everyone's talking about? The pianist girl? Yeah, they say she played early this morning, too. Lena quickly climbed down the ladder and pretended she needed to fetch something from the supply room. She wasn't ready to be talked about. She wasn't ready to be the pianist girl. It made her feel exposed, like someone had peeled back the quiet shield she had been wearing for years. The supply room was always her safe place. It was a narrow little space, filled with boxes, old props, and rolled-up carpets. Hardly anyone came in there. She closed the door behind her and leaned against it, breathing slowly. She didn't understand why playing felt so good, yet being noticed felt so frightening. She tried to shake the thoughts away and returned to work. Around the late afternoon, the event coordinator came back. He walked around the hall, checking schedules and giving instructions. When he saw Lena carrying a tray of microphones, he approached her again. "You did really well this morning," he said kindly. Lena kept her eyes on the microphones. "Thank you." Her voice was small. He studied her for a moment, then asked softly, "Did you stop playing for a long time?" Lena nodded. Was it because of something personal? She froze. The question hit too close. But he noticed her discomfort and immediately shook his head. "Sorry," he said. "You don't have to answer." "I shouldn't have asked." Lena swallowed, trying to steady her voice. "My mother. She used to teach me. After she passed away, I didn't want to play anymore." His expression softened. "I'm sorry. That must have been hard." She nodded. "I just didn't want to remember." "But today, you remembered in a good way," he said gently. She didn't reply. She didn't know what to say. "If playing makes you happy, you don't have to hide from it," he continued. "Sometimes we run from the things that heal us." Lena looked down at her hands. They were small, thin, and nervous-looking. She never thought of them as special, but today people had reacted to their touch like it was something magical. She was confused. She didn't understand how one moment at the piano could shift so much. "Anyway," he said with a smile, "I hope you play again soon." Then he walked away. Lena stood there for a while. The room felt quieter after he left. Later that evening, the hall began filling with people for another rehearsal. The piano was being used by someone practicing scales loudly. Lena avoided even glancing at it. Instead, she stayed backstage, organizing costumes and props. But as she placed items on shelves, she could hear the difference. The musician playing now hit the keys firmly, correctly, but without soul. The music sounded sharp, mechanical. It made her realize something: anyone could play notes, but not everyone could make them mean something. She wasn't sure if she could ever perform again. But she knew one thing clearly now. The music inside her wasn't gone. It had just been quiet. When rehearsal ended and the hall emptied again, she walked to the front quietly. The piano was alone again. The lights were dim. The air was calm. She stood there, staring at it. Should she play again? Or should she step away before she got too attached? Her heart said one thing. Her fear said another. She placed her fingers lightly on the keys, but didn't press down. Just touching them sent a small wave of warmth through her. Suddenly, she heard a quiet voice behind her. "Do you want me to leave the lights on for you?" the janitor asked. Lena jumped slightly and pulled her hand back. No, it's okay. I was just looking." The janitor gave her a soft, knowing smile. "That piano likes you." She blinked, confused. "What does that mean?" "Some instruments only open up when the right person touches them," he said simply. And he left. Closing the door gently, Linus stood alone, staring at the piano again, thinking about his words. She sat down once more. This time, she didn't play a tune she knew. She just touched one key softly, then another. The sound echoed in a slow, thoughtful rhythm. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She wasn't repeating something she learned years ago. She was simply speaking through the piano. The melody formed itself gentle, unsure, but honest. It wasn't perfect. Sometimes her fingers hesitated. Sometimes she pressed too lightly. But she kept going. As she played, she realized something important. Fear didn't completely disappear when she touched the piano. It was still there, but it didn't control her. The music was stronger. She didn't know how long she played. The world outside the hall slowly faded away. All she could hear was the sound she created. The empty seats in front of her seemed to listen quietly. And then, halfway through a soft phrase, she felt it. A shift, a release, like the weight she had been carrying for years had lifted. Just a little. Her eyes burned, but she didn't cry. She kept playing. When she ended the melody, her hands stayed on the keys, trembling slightly. She took a deep breath and looked around the empty hall. It felt different, almost welcoming. She stood up quietly and closed the piano lid gently, as if tucking it into bed. As she walked toward the exit, she didn't feel the same heaviness she carried that morning. Something had changed. She wasn't ready to perform. She wasn't ready to be in the spotlight. She wasn't ready to tell her full story, but she was ready to play, and that was the first step toward something she didn't yet know was coming, something bigger, louder, and brighter than anything she had imagined for herself. The next morning arrived slowly, as if the world itself was giving her time to prepare for what was coming. The sky was pale, the streets were quiet, and a cool wind touched the windows of the small house where she slept. She opened her eyes before the alarm rang, almost as if her body already knew that today was important. She sat up slowly, let her feet touch the cold floor, and took a deep breath. Her mind was full of thoughts from last night, especially the moment when she had been asked to play only a simple tune. She had followed the instruction quietly, but every part of her had wanted to play something real, something that belonged to her heart. But today was different. Today was not about proving anything to anyone. Today was about understanding herself and the world she had stepped into. She stood up, walked to the small mirror near the window, and looked at her reflection. Her face looked tired but determined. There was a softness in her eyes, but underneath it was a strength she hadn't shown in a long time. She tied her hair back and washed her face with cool water, hoping it would clear her mind. When she walked into the kitchen, her aunt was already sitting at the table, drinking tea and reading the morning news. "You woke up early," her aunt said, glancing at her with gentle eyes. "I couldn't sleep much," she answered in a quiet voice. "Worrying?" her aunt asked. She nodded. "It happens when you care about something," her aunt said, smiling softly. "But remember, no one can take away what is already inside you." The words were simple, but they touched her deeply. She always knew her aunt didn't have a big life or grand dreams, but she carried wisdom from years of watching, surviving, and understanding how people worked. She sat down across from her aunt and lifted the warm cup of tea. As she took her first sip, she quietly said, "They think I'm just someone who only knows the basics." Her aunt looked at her carefully. "And do you think they're right?" She shook her head. "No." "Good," her aunt said. "Because the problem isn't what they think. The problem is when you start believing them." For a moment, she didn't speak. She let the words sit in her chest like a small flame. When she finished breakfast, she put on a simple sweater and grabbed her bag. Before leaving, her aunt touched her shoulder and gave her a reassuring nod, the kind that said, "Go, you are stronger than you think." She walked outside and felt the chilly air touch her face. She kept her steps slow at first, then quicker as she reached the street. Her mind wandered back to the stage, the lights, the quiet whisper of the piano keys, and the people who had watched her with doubt. She remembered the instructor who had smiled politely while giving her the easiest task, the one meant for beginners. And she remembered the moment she played, not what they asked for, but what she felt. She hadn't planned to, but something inside her had taken control. It wasn't pride. It wasn't rebellion. It was simply the truth of who she was. As she walked toward the music building, she wondered what they were thinking now. Did they see her differently? Did they question their assumptions? Or were they thinking she had simply gotten lucky? When she reached the main door, she paused. The tall building looked larger today, almost intimidating, but she had no choice but to walk in. Inside, students were moving around, carrying books and instruments, chatting with excitement. She walked quietly through the crowd, unnoticed by most. She didn't mind. She preferred it that way, for now she entered the small practice room where she had spent hours the day before. The piano was still there, waiting silently, as if it remembered her touch. She closed the door behind her and sat down slowly. Her fingers rested on the keys, but she didn't play anything yet. Instead, she closed her eyes and listened. She listened to the quiet breathing of the room, the faint footsteps in the hallway, the steady beat of her own heart. Then she began to play a few gentle notes, letting her hands warm up. The melody was soft, slow, and peaceful. It wasn't something complicated. It was something for her, something to remind her why she loved music in the first place. As the notes drifted through the air, something inside her relaxed. She felt grounded again. She felt like herself. But the peaceful moment didn't last long. The door opened suddenly, and someone stepped inside. She stopped playing and turned to look. It was one of the students who had been in the room the day before. He stood there silently for a moment, as if trying to understand what he was hearing. "You're here early," he said. "I wanted to practice," she replied. He nodded slowly, then said, "Everyone's talking about what happened yesterday." She felt her chest tighten. "Are they?" "Yes," he said. Some people were surprised. Some were confused. A few were upset. But almost everyone wants to know how you did it. She didn't know what to say. She hadn't done anything special, at least not in her own mind. She simply played what was in her heart. "I just played," she said. He gave her a long look, then said, "Most people only play when they're told to. You played because you felt something. That's different." She turned her eyes back to the piano, unsure how to respond. He hesitated at the door before stepping fully inside. "There's something else," he added. "The instructor wants to see you today." Her heart skipped. "Why?" She asked. "I don't know," he said. But it sounded important. When he left the room, she sat still for a long moment. Her hands rested on her knees as she stared at the piano. Her thoughts were a mix of worry and curiosity. She stood up finally, grabbed her bag, and walked out of the practice room. The hallway felt colder now, as if the building itself was watching her. She reached the instructor's office and knocked lightly. "Come in," a calm voice said. She opened the door and stepped inside. The instructor was sitting behind a desk covered with papers and music sheets. They looked up and motioned for her to sit. "Watched your performance yesterday," the instructor began. Her hands tightened. "Slightly on her bag. You were told to play something simple." She nodded. "And yet," the instructor continued, "you played something far beyond that." She took a small breath and said, "I'm sorry if I overstepped." "I don't think you understand," the instructor said gently. "I'm not upset." The words surprised her. "What you played," the instructor said, leaning back in the chair, "was something most students here can only dream of expressing." Her eyes widened slightly. "But," the instructor continued, "I need to know something. Where did you learn to play like that?" She looked down at her hands and said quietly, "I learned at home, on an old piano. My father taught me before he left. After that, I just practiced alone." The instructor studied her carefully. "You have talent, no question. But talent without direction can get lost. I want to help you, but I need to know if you're ready for real work. Serious work." She lifted her eyes. "I'm ready." The instructor nodded. "Then be here after your classes. Every day. We're going to shape that talent into something strong." She felt a mix of relief and fear. "Thank you. One more thing," the instructor added. "When you're on stage, Never shrink yourself. Never hide what you can do. You've been quiet for too long. Her heartbeat grew steady again. She left the office with her mind spinning. The hallway felt different now, brighter, like something had shifted. The rest of the day moved slowly. She attended her classes quietly, taking notes, listening, learning. Some students looked at her with curiosity, some with surprise, a few with a hint of jealousy. She kept her focus on her work. When the final class ended, she went back to the practice room as instructed. The instructor walked in a few minutes later, carrying a stack of sheet music. "Today," the instructor said, "I want to see how you handle structure, not just emotion." She nodded and took the sheets. The next few hours were long and tiring. She played, repeated, corrected, and repeated again. Her fingers hurt, her back ached, and her mind felt stretched beyond its limit. But she didn't stop. At the end of the session, the instructor watched her closely and said, "You're raw, but you're good. Very good." She walked home that evening with sore hands and a tired mind, but somewhere inside her, a quiet pride stirred. Her aunt noticed her expression when she entered the house. "Hard day?" her aunt asked. "A good day," she answered softly. She lay in bed that night, exhausted but alive. The world felt different now, bigger, more open, more possible. And for the first time in a long while, she wasn't afraid of taking up space. She was ready for whatever came next. The next few days passed with a quiet intensity that she had never felt before. Each morning, she woke up before the sun rose, almost as if her mind refused to rest until she reached the piano again. The house was always silent at that hour, and she moved through it carefully, not wanting to disturb her aunt. She washed her face, brushed her hair, and grabbed her bag before stepping out into the soft, cold morning air. Walking to the music building became a routine she looked forward to. The streets were calm, the sidewalks nearly empty, and the world felt peaceful. Sometimes she practiced what she had learned in her mind as she walked. Other times, she simply listened to the sounds around her. Every little noise: a closing door, a passing car, a bird calling from a rooftop felt like a small rhythm that belonged to a larger melody. When she reached the building each day, she unlocked the practice room and sat at the piano. She touched the keys as gently as she could, warming her fingers before starting the exercises her instructor had given her. She practiced scales, patterns, and difficult sections again and again. She had never trained this seriously before. Her father had taught her with love, but not with strict structure. Now she was learning the discipline behind the emotion. But even with that discipline, she could not stop herself from drifting into her own melodies, sometimes when no one was around. It happened naturally, as if her heart spoke to her hands before her mind noticed. The music she created during these quiet moments felt like a conversation with her younger self, the girl who had sat at an old piano, playing to escape empty nights and heavy silence. On the third day of this new routine, the instructor walked in earlier than usual. She quickly stopped playing and straightened in her seat. "Don't stop," the instructor said, closing the door behind them. "I've been listening for a moment." She felt her cheeks warm. "I'm sorry. You were exploring," the instructor said calmly. "And that's good. But today we're going to shift focus." She nodded, waiting. The instructor placed a new sheet of music on the stand. "This is a piece most students struggle with. It requires control, emotion, and discipline. I want to see how you handle it." She studied the music carefully. She didn't recognize it, but the notes looked complex and demanding. "Take your time," the instructor said. "I'm not expecting you to master it today." She placed her fingers on the keys and began playing slowly. The first few measures were difficult, and she stumbled more than once. But she kept going. The instructor watched her silently, not correcting or interfering. When she reached the end of the first page, she stopped and sat back. It's challenging, she admitted. Good, the instructor replied. Growth doesn't come from easy things. For the next hour, she tried different sections, repeating the hardest parts until she could feel her fingers learning the shape of the music. It was tiring, but there was a quiet satisfaction in each small improvement. When the lesson ended, the instructor said, "You're doing well. But I want you to remember something. Technical skill matters, but it should never erase your natural voice. Don't lose the part of you that played on the first day." She nodded slowly. She understood. There was something inside her that didn't come from training, something personal, something fragile. She couldn't let it disappear. After the instructor left, she practiced alone for another hour. The room felt warm from the sunlight entering through the small window. At one point, she stopped and placed her hand on the piano as if it were a living thing. "I'll get better," she whispered to it. The room stayed quiet, but she felt as if it understood. When she walked home that evening, her hands were sore again. Her steps were slow, but her heart felt full. Her aunt was preparing dinner when she arrived. "You're pushing yourself a lot," her aunt said as she placed a plate on the table. "I want to," she answered simply. Her aunt smiled. "Then I'm proud of you. Just remember to rest too." That night, after dinner, she lay in bed thinking about the music. Her mind replayed the difficult passages over and over. She drifted off to sleep, still hearing the piano. The next morning, something unexpected happened when she entered the building. Several students were gathered near the board where announcements were usually posted. They were whispering, pointing, and talking in excited voices. She tried to walk past quietly, but someone noticed her. "Hey," a student called out. "There's going to be a performance night next month." She stopped. "Performance night?" "Yes," another student added. "It's one of the biggest events of the year. Everyone prepares something." Her heartbeat quickened slightly. "Are you going to join?" Someone else asked that she didn't know how to answer. "You should," one girl said. "People still talk about what you played the other day." Their eyes were on her now, waiting, expecting. She swallowed quietly. She wasn't used to attention like this. "I'll think about it," she sighed. She walked away before they could ask more questions. Inside the practice room, she closed the door and leaned against it for a moment. A performance night. Just the thought of standing in front of a crowd again made her nervous. But at the same time, something inside her stirred, a feeling she couldn't ignore. The instructor arrived shortly afterward. "I assume you saw the announcement," they said. She nodded. "And?" "I'm not sure," she admitted. "Why?" The instructor asked gently. "Because I don't know if I'm ready for something like that." "You're more ready than you think," the instructor replied. "But the decision is yours." She sat at the piano and played a few notes, trying to calm her mind. "If I'm going to perform," she said slowly, "I want to play something that feels like me. Not something just to impress." The instructor's eyes softened. "Then write something. Create your own piece." She stared at the instrument. Writing her own music, she had never done it seriously. She had always played from emotion, never from structure. "I don't know if I can," she whispered. "You can," the instructor said. "You already have the heart of a composer. You just need to trust yourself." For the rest of the lesson, instead of practicing set pieces, the instructor guided her toward expressing her ideas. She tried simple melodies at first, letting her hands wander gently. Some parts sounded messy, others sounded soft and beautiful. She kept exploring. "Don't think too much," the instructor said quietly. "Just feel." The next hour felt like opening a door she had always ignored. She found herself playing fragments of emotions: loneliness, hope, longing, and quiet strength. The instructor listened without interruption. When she finished, the instructor said, "There, That is your voice." She didn't know what to say, but a small, warm feeling spread inside her after the instructor left. She stayed for another hour, shaping the fragments into something more complete. It wasn't perfect, but it was hers. Walking home later, her steps felt lighter. Her aunt noticed the change the moment she entered the house. "Something good happened?" her aunt asked. She nodded. "I think I found something new today." Her aunt smiled warmly. The following days were filled with a new energy. She continued practicing through the mornings and afternoons, but her evenings were spent exploring her own music. She filled pages with notes, erased mistakes, tried again, and slowly built a melody that felt like a story or story. Each night she walked home tired but fulfilled. Her fingers grew stronger, her confidence deeper. Whenever doubt returned, she remembered the instructor's words, "Don't lose your voice." 2 weeks later, the instructor listened to her early version of the piece. "It's raw," the instructor said, "but it's powerful. Keep working." And she did, every day, every night. What she didn't realize was how close the performance night was, and how much her life would change when the moment finally arrived. The day of the performance arrived with a quiet weight that settled over everything. It was the kind of morning where the air felt thicker, as if the world knew something important was about to happen. She woke up early, long before her alarm, and lay still in bed for a moment, listening to the soft sounds of the house. Her heart was already beating faster than usual. She took a deep breath and slowly sat up. The room around her felt familiar yet different, as though the months she had spent practicing had changed not only her, but the space she lived in. She got ready quietly, brushing her hair, washing her face, and choosing the simplest clothes she owned. She didn't want anything fancy. She wanted to feel like herself. When she stepped out into the living room, her aunt was already awake. She sat at the table with a cup of tea, looking at her with a warm, gentle smile. "Couldn't sleep much?" her aunt asked softly. She shook her head. Her aunt stood up and walked to her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Whatever happens today, remember that you've already come far. I'm proud of you." The words touched her deeply. She nodded, unable to speak for a moment. Her aunt didn't push her to talk. She didn't need to dot after a small breakfast. She grabbed her bag and headed out. The streets were quiet, and the early light painted the sky in soft shades. As she walked, she tried to calm her breathing. Every step brought her closer to the performance hall, and with each step, her mind replayed everything that had happened over the past weeks. The first day she had played, the surprise in the room, the instructor's words, the hours of practice, and the private moments where her music grew into something she could call her own. When she reached the building, she paused outside the door. The windows reflected the morning light, and she closed her eyes for a moment, letting the calmness settle inside her. Inside, people were already setting up for the event. Students carried instruments, staff members checked microphones and lighting, and the stage was being prepared for the performances. She moved quietly through the space until she reached her usual practice room. She opened the door and slipped inside, closing it behind her. The piano stood waiting, its polished surface reflecting the soft light from the window. She approached it slowly, almost reverently, and placed her hand on it. "Just one more time," she whispered. She sat down and began to play her piece, the one she had created from pieces of her emotions, memories, and dreams. Her hands moved softly across the keys. The melody was gentle at first, and stronger and soft again, like breath. She closed her eyes and let herself feel the music instead of concentrating on the technique. When she finished, she let her hands rest on her lap. Her chest felt warm and steady. She knew she wasn't perfect. She knew experts could find mistakes. But the piece was hers, and that mattered more. A soft knock came at the door, The instructor stepped inside. "Are you ready?" The instructor asked quietly. She nodded. "As ready as I can be." The instructor gave her a small smile. "Good. Remember, today isn't about competing. It's about sharing. Just breathe and let the music speak." She stood up, feeling a tremble in her hands. The instructor noticed, but didn't comment. Instead, they walked with her toward the hall dot. As she reached the backstage area, the sound of people talking filled her ears. The seats outside were already half full. Students, families, teachers, and visitors had come for the event. The lights above the stage were bright, casting warm glows across the room. She waited behind the curtain, listening to the performers before her. Some played confidently, others nervously, but each one had a story behind their music. When her turn drew closer, she felt the familiar tightness in her chest. Finally, someone called her name. "It's your turn." She stepped forward. The curtain opened slowly, revealing the stage. The hall looked enormous from where she stood. Rows and rows of people sat watching, whispering softly, waiting. The lights shone down on her, warm but intense. Her hands felt like they were shaking again, but she kept walking. When she reached the piano at the center of the stage, she paused, closed her eyes for a moment, and breathed in deeply. "This is your moment," she told herself. "Just play." She sat down, letting her fingers rest gently on the keys. For a brief second, the entire hall felt silent, so silent she wondered if everyone was holding their breath. Then she began. The first notes were soft, almost fragile. But as she continued, the music grew warmer, fuller. The melody flowed like a quiet river at first, then like waves rising and falling. She poured her emotions into every movement, her fear, her hope, her memories of her father teaching her on the old piano, the loneliness she had carried for years, and the new courage she had discovered through her practice. Her eyes stayed closed for parts of the piece, letting her heart guide her fingers. She wasn't thinking about the people watching. She wasn't thinking about the mistakes she might make. She was simply there, in the music, letting it tell its story. When she reached the middle section, part she had rewritten several times, her hands moved with more strength. The hall filled with a deep, rich sound. She felt her fear melting away, replaced by a calm certainty. The music belonged to her, and she belonged to it. The final notes came softly, like a whisper fading into the air. When the last sound disappeared, she kept her hands on the keys for a moment, as if saying goodbye to the piece. Then she lifted her head. For a heartbeat, the hall was silent, and everything changed. The applause began slowly, then grew louder. It filled the entire room, hundreds of hands clapping together. Some people stood. She saw faces lit with surprise, admiration, and emotion. She felt her breath catch in her throat. The instructor was standing off to the side, watching her with pride. She saw students who had doubted her now looking at her with new eyes. She saw strangers smiling warmly. She stood up from the piano and bowed gently. Her hands were still trembling, but this time it wasn't from fear. As she walked backstage, the sound of applause continued to echo in her ears. When she reached the instructor, they placed a hand on her shoulder. "You did it," the instructor said quietly. "And you didn't just perform. You shared something real." She felt her throat tighten with emotion. "Thank you for everything. You earned this," the instructor replied. "Never forget that." When she stepped into the hallway, several students approached her with excitement. "That was beautiful. You played like you were living inside the music. I've never heard anything like it." She answered their words with shy smiles and quiet thank yous. She wasn't used to attention, but today felt different. Today didn't feel like too much. It felt